As we are nearing the end of the year 2021 and as my wife's PC was still running an AMD 8350 paired with a GTX 1060 6GB on it, and all of that in a brutally extinct case, which was maybe bought almost 10 years back, more than 10 years back. Well, it was time to upgrade all of it, and I over effing smartly chose the Intel 10700F because no story is a good story without a good frigging villain in it. Hey everyone, Mukul here. So apart from working on her PC, my wife also games and streams sometimes, and keeping up with the latest titles was getting a bit hard, as you would imagine, but it has held up pretty strongly all these years and can still perform fine at many of the tasks I throw on it, even after almost 8 or 9 years of its release, which is darn impressive to be honest. Who would have thought anyone would be saying something like this for the most infamous AMD FX series chip in the future? And here we are. Now I was really eyeing three options: the Ryzen 5600X, the Ryzen 5800X and the Intel 10700F. Of course, the cheapest one among these was the 10700F, and the 5600X was about 30% more expensive, and the 5800X was about 80% more expensive than the Intel i7 10700F. FFXX. Performance wise, in a few of the titles she plays, the 10700F performed as good as the 5600X, but where the 10700F beats the 5600X is in the overall multi-core performance by about 10 to 12%, as it had 2 more physical cores on it and isn't a very old processor relatively. What was really messed up was that the Ryzen 5800X was priced 80% higher than the 10700F, of course, for a performance boost of about 30 to 35% in most of the games. So mathematically, the Ryzen 5800X held the poorest value for the money overall. Also, assuming if I have to choose a 5,000 rupees or $70 air cooler for any of these chips, that in itself kind of levels out equally in terms of budget for any of the choices I've made for this build. What was more tempting about getting the Intel 10700F was more savings through getting the MSI B460M Mortar motherboard, which has excellent frigging VRM performance for a price of about 10,000 rupees or $140. And as it was way cheaper than any B550 motherboard option, which I would have to get for a Ryzen chip if I had to choose the same kind of VRM performance comparatively, and that would have easily rose the overall budget of the build. I mean, the board does look beautiful with nicely designed heatsinks all over it, and it does look very armory and shielded for all the right reasons. I mean, it's trying its best to shield itself against all the heat the 10700F would make in the future. So I chose the 10700F for its overall price to performance ratio. Yes, I could have gotten the Ryzen 5600X too, but this is a machine that sometimes streams too, as I've stated earlier. So those extra 2 cores and 4 threads from the 10700F were going to help a lot in those sort of scenarios. Also, that means I could also sometimes use her machine, if she allows me, as a backup machine to render most of the stuff I do for my 3D projects. And as the GPU prices are still out of reach for many of us, pairing the 10700F with our older Zotac GTX 1060 AMP edition with 6GB of VRAM on it, well, that kind of felt more financially sane. God, don't we all hate these times. What I didn't really know at this time was how bad this decision might turn out to be when you let a 14nm plus Intel chip run mad on a thermally capable motherboard with practically no power limits on it. So I get all the parts and sat down to shoot the whole build, but in the process of doing so, I do realize that I didn't really want to bore anyone with another build video on my channel, looking at the fact that all the components here are not brand new or something which just recently launched. And even when I didn't have too much time in my hands, I thought to experiment a little with this build, which is kind of the main content of this video. I had a new case lying around, which was the Silverstone Fara R1, which had no stock fans in the front of it. So I used the 3 RGB fans from Cooler Master from my older case in it. And the Fara R1 acted like a bitch when I tried to mount the front panel back in after installing the 3 fans there. So I had to move all of them a bit up again, and after a lot of push and pull, I was able to snap the front panel back in. Now, because I am someone who would invest a lot of time over something, especially when I don't have a lot of time in my life, I did the worst imaginable thing one could do and paired the processor with the Intel stock cooler. Yeah, roast me in the comments if you want. So yeah, after hooking up the system, I ran a quick Cinebench R20 test just out of curiosity, and the curiosity did kill the cat. Well, these graphs only mean that I was on the verge of burning this whole system up, and take this as a proof that no one should waste their time trying or testing out these Intel stock coolers. So yeah, you can definitely throw it somewhere around your house. just in case your chip dies and you need it for a replacement or something. Now, because of the choice of the motherboard, the 10700F ramped up to its max capabilities and the total power pushed by the whole CPU package reached up to 165 watts, which of course would burn every Intel stock cooler ever made. But you know what? During gaming with the stock cooler, the average temperatures of these titles were just fine. They range somewhere around 75 degrees Celsius, so unless you're playing a game or running a render that can actually eat up the maximum frequency across all the cores, well, until that you don't need to worry for a while if you're short on funds. But it's always better to upgrade to a better CPU cooler any day, as when you say better and better again, then it ought to be better. So obviously the i7 needed a better cooler, and I thought why not give the older Cooler Master TPC 812 a try too, which had kept the AMD FX 8350 chip quite cool for all these years. I mean, yeah, clearly I had ample time in my hands at that time and the impatient wife was like, but I bore the consequence in the name of science. The heatsink on this is pretty massive, and the 6 heat pipes should at least keep the 10700F saner than the stock cooler itself. And this might also help me save more on my total budget, which I plan to spend on this build. So I ran the Cinebench R20 test again, and this time there was a massive thermal improvement. But still the temperatures were rising above 90 degrees Celsius when the ambient temperature was around 29 degrees C. I was almost satisfied, but not entirely. I mean, why settle? Unlike OnePlus. So now I was really thinking to swap the Noctua U14S, which cools the Ryzen 3900X in my primary system, and maybe to put that on this 10700 chip, as clearly Intel wasn't shying thermally here. But as I was contemplating all of that, the Deepcool AK620 came in through my doors, and I thought why not give it a try too. I have already covered it on the Ryzen 3900X chip in my main review, and this would be a good opportunity to test it on an Intel chip too, so yeah, why not? Well, the installation was pretty easy with the AK620 on an Intel chip, as it was on the Ryzen platform too. You place the metal backplate on the back of the motherboard and then screw these 4 two-way screws on it. The arrows will denote where these brackets are supposed to go facing towards the CPU, which does help if you hate reading manuals. After that, you put on the Intel supporting retention brackets and then tighten them with these 4 more screws. If you want the cooler fans to be aligned to the front and back of the case, then make sure you put these brackets horizontally and not vertically. And after that, apply the thermal paste, which the AK620 does come with, and just throw the cooler on top of these 2 side screws, which are in the middle of the tower, and tighten these screws alternatively to the extent you feel satisfied. But don't let a broken motherboard make you reach that point. After putting the inner fan back in, I put the 2 ramps in, and the front fan will hide both of the ramps and their RGB lit areas, sadly. Well, there is definitely a drawback of using dual tower CPU coolers over RGB ramps. These ramps are 49mm tall, so I had to raise the front fan a bit upward to accommodate them under it. So if you get a chance of saving some bucks, unlike in my case, you can definitely go for the non-RGB RAM variants if you ever consider this cooler or any of the dual tower coolers. Connect the 2 wires from the fans on the splitter and connect that solo end of the splitter on the CPU fan header. At this point, I just hope this will all be worth it by the end of it, because I have spent so much time. And as already stated in my main review video, I truly love how the cooler looks and feels inside an all black case, which most of us anyway have. It does look big here, as the Fara R1 isn't a huge case dimensionally, but it does blend well overall. But a fun fact that the Deepcool AK620 is smaller than the Noctua D15 and performs as good as that based on a few reviews I've seen. And it actually costs cheaper than the D15 too. So yeah, I think Deepcool does have a solid air cooling winner here. I think I'm just fanboying over it. So now I was really curious to see how the cooler would perform on the 10700F, which was easily pushing 160 watts in all the previous tests. And the AK620 calmed all my anxious nerves finally, when I saw the max temperatures, which this time didn't cross 82.5 degrees Celsius mark during the Cinebench R20 test. And heck, for the first time during all of these different air cooler test experience, I felt like I can push the cooler more on the 10700F, and the results of a 10-minute long Cinebench R23 test turned out to be impressive too. So yeah, I think I finally found a solution, the perfect solution for the 10700F and the kind of heat and the kind of power it was eating on the chip. And by just upgrading the processor and not the GPU, the performance in GTA 5 doubled, and Minecraft saw a performance gain of about 3 times because it is a CPU intensive game, and Apex Legends stayed about the same because I guess it loves the GPU more than the CPU. So yeah, I tried to save some money, and my decision of choosing the i7-10700F over the other more expensive Ryzen options almost got ruined in the end. If I had to spend more on a better air cooler, which might have costed as good as a Noctua D15, which I originally planned to swap on my Ryzen 9 3900X chip and then put the Noctua U14S from that machine on the Intel 10700F chip, because it was as hot as my Ryzen 3900X clearly. As both the chips love consuming around 160 watts of power and the U14S is just managing the job on the 12-core Ryzen 3900X, I thought why not use this as an excuse and get that chunky D15 for the 3900X, as it clearly deserves more cooling on it. But all of that would have made me spend more money than I originally thought. So the Deepcool AK620 couldn't have gotten released at a better time, which helped me save at least around 3,000 rupees or 40-45 US dollars, which is good money in my opinion and might get me more burgers over the span of a few more months. So yeah, happy fooding to me now. But I did learn my lesson that Intel above the i5s really suck when it comes to the kind of power they can eat and the kind of heat they can produce. They are good performance and they perform good for the kind of money they are asking right now. But that's one consideration you all need to consider before making the purchase. So, well, I hope you enjoyed the video, as this video was all over the place for a couple of months now, till I found a solid conclusion to it. To support my efforts on the channel, you can buy some of the stuff used for this build from the description below. You can also hop on to our Discord server for more chit chats on relevant topics. So yeah, stay safe humans. That's all for today. Mewbot out, 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 out.